different ones for webinars?
I do. So it depends on which way you want to go with this. So if you want to go with storytelling, we could talk about the different types of stories, right? But the 3 golden rules of my business are storytelling, sales, and sales systems. So we could break into each of those things concerning a webinar, how we use a sales system with a webinar. We could go into each of those things if you would like.
So ideally it's webinar focused.
Yes.
So whatever way you want to share or talk about your 3 golden rules and storytelling, so long as our listeners can see how it relates to webinars, that would be great.
Okay. I'm just writing that down.
Perfect.
To make sure we stay on track. Feel free to bring me back on track. I trust you.
Yeah, I just find it a bit of a challenge to interrupt people when they're in their flow. So we'll keep it short and to the point. So if the answers typically lead to more questions, which provides a better flow than a 10-minute answer, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It does indeed.
We'll just keep the dialogue going, if that's okay.
Yeah. Just to let you know, I get very nervous with every interview. I won't show it. I will try my best to contain my nerves, but I'm warning you ahead of time.
Yeah, well, it's only you and I having a chat, so don't worry about it. Don't worry. It's easy to say don't worry, but it's just...
I know. It's just me.
It's just me. It's just you and I having a chat. We just happen to be recording it.
All right. Let's do it. Let's have fun.
Okay, so the cue for us actually starting is me just welcoming you and thanking you for being on the Webinar Wealth podcast.
Okay.
Alrighty?
Yes. Let's go.
Hello, Pam, and welcome to the Webinar Wealth podcast. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you for having me. I am excited. Let's do it.
We've had a number of conversations over the past couple of weeks and months, which has been great to get to know you and what you do. And you're no stranger to webinars and getting great success from webinars. So as is customary with this podcast, we're going to talk about your 3 golden rules of webinars, your 3 non-negotiables when it comes to running your webinars. So let's kick off with your golden rule number 1. If you can share that with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, golden rule number 1 for webinars is storytelling galore. Golden rule number 1.
Great. So when you say storytelling, please tell us more about that story.
Absolutely. So my background, Johnny, for everybody who's watching or listening, is in acting. And when I didn't really want to be in business or think about being in business. I just wanted to be an actress. And so I came out of drama school and, in the midst of performing, etc., I knew that I wanted something else on the side. But when I came into the business space, I sort of came in, actually, my very first thing, Johnny, was webinars. That was what I started with. One day, I remember in the middle of the night, seeing this ad. And, for somebody who was running this thing called a webinar. And I remember thinking, what is a webinar? Obviously, I was being targeted on this ad. What is a webinar? And so I clicked it, I put in my name and email, and I showed up for this webinar. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this person is in their home or office, and they are able to reach so many people around the world. And then I thought, I'm going to do it myself when I start my business. So I started my business, and I ran webinars, and it was amazingly crap. It fell flat on its face like a pancake, honestly. I would have hundreds of people at the webinar. This was the time, Johnny, when you would live stream and Facebook would push it to everywhere, right? Not like now. This was when live streaming was the thing to do. And loads of people would turn up, and at the end of the webinar, they would say, Pam, it was amazing. We learned so much. We gathered, it was just incredible, Pam. And guess how many sales I would make? 0. This happened over and over and over again. And it started to make me think, Pam, maybe you're not cut out for this business thing, not even just the webinar thing, because in my mind, I knew webinars, it was the way forward. So I started to think, maybe you're not cut out for this business thing. But then I thought, let me try it one more time. So I started to do a little bit more research, and this was when I discovered people like Russell Brunson, discovered lots of other people who do webinars really well, and I learned the perfect webinar and everything, and I thought, I'm going to do the perfect webinar and it's going to be incredible. I put out another live stream and a lot of people signed up for my new webinar. On the day of the webinar, I was nervous because I've done this several times and nothing had ever happened. I was nervous. The webinar was supposed to be at 7:30 p.m. At 7:32, I'm behind my laptop, still waiting to go live because I am now shaking. Is this going to work? So I talk myself into it and I go 3, 2, 1 and go live, and I go live and I go, hello everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. And the numbers are going up and people are coming in and it feels amazing. And I'm in my element again. And I'm going through my slides through this webinar, about 20 minutes in. I realized there's been something flashing in the corner. It's the chat. Let me have a look. What is in the chat? I open the chat thinking it's, they have some amazing things to say. And all I saw in the chat was, we can't see your slides. This webinar is broken. We cannot see what you're sharing, Pam.
Okay,
and for 20 minutes, I had been going through this, and I'm not a very techie person, as you know, Johnny. And instantly I went into panic mode. And I started panicking and I said, I'm really sorry guys, give me a second, let me try and fix this. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I get my slides so that you can see my slides and not me and see everything? It wasn't working. And in that moment, I made a decision that changed everything for me. And it was, Pam, you have two options. You can either shut down this webinar and just never do it again and, whatever. Or you can just let go of everything you had practiced, everything you had created, and just talk. And so I decided to do that. At this point, the numbers had gone down. We had roughly 10 people remaining on this webinar. So I'd go to 9 and 8 and 10 and 11. And I was like, Pam, stop looking at the numbers, just talk. And I said, I'm really sorry, guys. This clearly isn't working. But as some of you are still here, I'm just going to talk. I don't have my slides. And so this is when I just went into storytelling. I just shared stories. I shared stories about my day. I shared stories about my kids. I just went from story to story to story to story. And at one point, somebody then drops in the chat and says, but Pam, what is your program? You have a program that you're on. What is it? And I said, it's... I have this course that I've created. It's an 8-week program, and it's £2,000 for the program. And the moment I said that, I was like, oh no, because on my slides it was supposed to be 1,500. Well, because I was so nervous and everything had gone so badly, I just plucked a number and I put it there, and I put my PayPal link in there. Within 24 hours of this entire situation, out of 10 people who were remaining on that webinar, 6 of them invested in my program for the very first time. And that was when I discovered, and I knew, and I realized that the key to sales, the key to enrolling clients, webinar aside, webinar is a vehicle, but the key to making this webinar work, it's not necessarily in the bells and whistles or the slides or the everything else. Those things are brilliant and they do help you to have a lot more impact. But the real key, the thing that allows people to buy into you, which causes them to buy from you over and over and over and over again, is when they have connected to you. And that is through storytelling.
And how do we craft our story then?
Well, so it depends on what you are, what your presentation is about. But the very, very first story that you want to craft in a webinar is your backstory, essentially. Not just a webinar, a live stream, whatever. In any situation where you want people to connect with you, it's your backstory. So an example of what I've just shared is an example of one of my backstories. We all have several different backstories. If I was speaking to an audience of women, for example, or women in business or mums in business, I would share a different part of my backstory. If I was doing a webinar that was created for the corporate world, I would share a different part of my backstory. So the key with really understanding which part of your backstory to share. Is really thinking about who is the audience and what is the outcome. What is their life? Who are they? Whatever you tell, it has to be something that they resonate with so that they can see themselves in it. And that is when you know that you have nailed it.
Great. In terms of, let's say it's a 60-minute webinar, how much of it is your backstory?
Oh gosh. For a 60-minute webinar, your backstory, probably 2 minutes.
Great, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, probably 2 minutes. And
the objective is to really build rapport and for your audience to see, hey, she's just like me.
Yes.
And I can achieve this too.
Yes, if she can do it, so can I. That's it. It's connection. That's all it is. It's not a brag alert. It's not for you to show off. And this is where a lot of people get it wrong, because they go into this big thing and brag. And it's like, no, actually, what you've done is you've repelled your audience. No, we just want to fall in love with you and bring the walls down, because you've all got to remember that when people turn up at a webinar, they are not coming to be sold. They are not coming. They're not receptive to buying anything, to investing in anything, or even to clicking on anything, which is a micro commitment. They are there, and the moment they get there, their walls are up. So the purpose of your backstory initially only has one job to do, and that is simply to bring the walls down.
Sure. So a little bit of vulnerability as opposed to bragging, essentially.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And then your next golden rule then, not that they're in any particular order, of course. So we've got storytelling, and I know it's a key part of your business as well, which we can talk about. But your next go-to rule then for every webinar
is sales. That is my next golden rule. Every webinar you put out, it has to produce something. Now, when it comes to sales, there are different ways of generating sales on a webinar, of course. You can either sell directly on the webinar or you can sell on the call. And the way that we make decisions about that is purely based on the price point. So if I am selling, my mastermind or any type of offer that is, I would say, honestly, above 3K, I'm sending people to a call and we are closing. So I'm going to sell on the webinar, but we're going to close on the call. But if I'm selling something, much lower than that, then I would both sell and close within that webinar.
Great. And any specifics then in terms of, is it a value stack? Is it a no-brainer offer? Is there a scarcity? Is there urgency?
Absolutely.
What do you like to do, or all of the above, or can we get some insight into more specifics? Great, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of all of that. You definitely want to have some sort of scarcity, but it has to be genuine scarcity. I don't play the game of, let's say we only have 5, but really we have 50. I don't play those games. I believe in running a business with integrity and of integrity. So scarcity is very, very important. So before I go into a webinar, I would have already decided, along with my team, this is how many spots we are opening up, so that, we have the right numbers on there. So we use a bit of that. Sometimes we use a stack, but a stack isn't always necessary. I think that a stack is more necessary when you are selling and closing on the webinar itself. Then you need that stack. However, if you are sending people to a call, it's actually more persuasion that you need. It's actually more storytelling that you need. It's actually more, the goal is really just to get people to raise their hands to say, I want that link. It's not even to click the link. It's that first micro commitment that says, I want the link. That's the very first goal. And so with that, you don't need to overly sell it. You don't need to, you don't need a stack essentially for that. It can help, but if you have planned your webinar in the right way, your content, you've given value in your content, you've infused it with persuasive storytelling, people should from the beginning already say, I want to work with Johnny. I'm waiting, like I'm ready to even talk to Johnny. Even if it's not a case of I'm going to work with Johnny, is I want to click that link and get on a conversation, which is the very first step.
And the conversation is framed in such a way that it's not it's not specifically said that it's a sales call, but it has that kind of premise.
So again, there are several ways of doing that. And it depends on the type of webinar that I'm running. We do have webinars or masterclasses, as I prefer to call them, where, it's very specific, where I'm telling you, raise your hands if you want to have a conversation about this program. And I'm very, very direct, very explicit.
Yeah.
And I much prefer that, because I know that when you get on that call with myself or a member of my team, we both know you're not there to be sold, because I've done the selling already. I've already told you.
And it's not some free coaching with an opportunity to mention the program. It's specifically a call. In other words, don't book the call if you're not interested in the program. Whether we say that or not, but that's the context.
Yes, and I think people really respect that. And, I value my time and I value other people's time. And I make that very clear. Don't book the call if you don't plan to turn up, for example, right? If you're not interested, don't book the call. I like to be direct, and I find that people respect that, and we just get much higher conversions just because we're honest.
And is there an application form to go with the call to learn a little bit more, but also to encourage and invite them to do a little bit of work before the call, as opposed to just name an email and a date?
Absolutely. So our application form doesn't send people to learn more about the program. No, because I've done that, right? And when you get on the call, you will learn some more should you have questions. So the application simply is to see your level of commitment to this.
Yes.
Right? And so that we can do our homework before you get on that call. Yeah.
Great. And then your third golden rule?
Sales systems. So we have storytelling, sales, and finally sales systems.
Great. Okay. So let's get into that then. When you talk about systems, a number of steps, support from your team, what does your system look like?
Well, we have several systems, but my absolute favorite is when we have a buyer on the webinar. Right, so I'm going to talk about it in respect of the webinar, as we're on the Webinar Wealth podcast. So I would, obviously there are lots of webinar funnels out there. We use them, but we tend to use them as the middle part of our funnel. So on the front end of our funnel, we prefer to use a self-liquidating funnel where somebody has purchased something of, no matter how small it is, and essentially we're bringing a buyer to the webinar, because I have a saying that I picked up from God knows where, but I love it, and it is those who pay attention. Right? So I find that when somebody has purchased something, they're more excited to show up. Your show up rate increases. They are paying attention. They already see you as their coach. They already see you as their mentor, which is very different to somebody who's just signed up to turn up at a webinar, who just kind of saw it as, let me just sign up for this. Two very different avatars, you see.
So is it a free lead magnet to a upsell that's like $17, $27, something like that?
Absolutely. That's one of the ways of doing it.
So they've paid for, and is that they've paid for a foundation course, a video series, a more valuable resource? What if they paid for pre-webinar?
I prefer that they have paid for a PDF.
Great.
And I'll tell you why. It's easier to consume. One of the worst things that you can do with any low ticket product is to give something to people that takes them a long time to consume. So video series are not my favorite. Neither is just anything. So it's got to be something that is easy to consume. It solves a big problem. It's a problem that they have every single day, and it's a product that they can use to solve that problem on a daily basis. If you can have that combination, then you have something amazing that people will not only want, but they will always remember that they got it from you, which is big.
And it's closely connected, of course, then to the webinar.
Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, as part of that system, we then have indoctrination emails that says, hey, thank you so much for investing in such and such. I want to over deliver. I would like to invite you to blank. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to make it a bonus, specifically like a VIP masterclass specifically for people who have purchased this specific product.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. And then are they live typically or evergreen, or sometimes you do live, sometimes you do evergreen?
My webinars, I prefer to do my webinars live. However, we have something within my business that I call the lean launch, right? The lean launch is essentially a series of videos. It's a broken down webinar. I call it, it's like a treasure hunt, right? It's a broken down webinar, and each piece lives on a separate page. And you only get access to the page based on the actions that you take within my email automation. So you take an action, it sends you this page. You take another action, it sends you this page. And I find that using that after people have, so we use that specifically. We use the lean launch in two different ways, in all honesty. First, we can use it as a front end, but I much prefer, and it's much more effective when we use it after somebody has scheduled a call. They then get into this treasure hunt before they get on the call. We find that we get a yes. And so then we have roughly 60 to 80% conversion rate, depending on the offer, etc.
Great. And the value then, the ticket price for people on the call, the program essentially, your signature program, at what price point is that?
Well, we have various. We have one. We have a middle ticket product which is $1,500. Then we have another middle ticket which is $5,997, and then our mastermind is $9,997 and $20,997. So we have 4 different programs on the back end.
Great. And for those who don't book a call, they're back into a nurture sequence. What do you do to move the people who didn't buy at that point to become buyers in the ideally near future?
You know what? I don't necessarily put a lot of emphasis on that, only because the way my business is, I'm constantly creating and giving value. So I know that somehow you are going to end up back on this call. I just know it. It's going to happen, right? We have so much that goes out to our email list. We have a newsletter that goes out full of value. We have our YouTube channel, essentially. And I have people get on the call and they say, Pam, I've been following you for 2 years before I got on this call, or I just found you yesterday. And it's very interesting to see the journey, but I try not to worry about that so much, because there are people coming in on the front end, so much so, and I just focus on giving value. And I know that, that value that we constantly give, it's a seed, and it will essentially grow, and they will come back, and it just happens that way.
So you would have a link regularly to book that call?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Or a link that brings you into another funnel.
Any one thing that comes to mind that we didn't get to address?
I think we, based on our conversation, I think we addressed a lot. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody, from watching this or listening, wherever, when it's published, of course, has a question, I'd be happy to answer. But I would definitely like to wrap by saying that webinars are incredibly powerful. I'm not convinced that they are newbie friendly, however, and I know that a lot of marketers will disagree with me. I think that it's a scaling strategy as opposed to I'm at the beginning of my business. Now I'm going to start running webinars. There are so many, there are just so many moving parts, so many variables that makes it work or not work. And we live in a time, Johnny, where people want microwave solutions. They want to try something and it works, you see. And so that is why when I teach, I don't necessarily teach webinars for when you're first starting out in your business. I see webinars as a scaling strategy. Once you have nailed these 3 components, you've nailed your storytelling, you've nailed how to sell, how to close that call, you've nailed the sales systems, then you tag on webinars, and webinars kind of becomes the glue that puts everything together. Then that's how I see it.
So ideally, people that show up for the webinar are warm they're buyers, as you mentioned earlier, they're warm to the idea
Yes.
of working with you, and it's not their first time to see you.
It's not their first time. And now I have ran cold webinars and still converted, to be quite honest with you. But I'm also not at the beginning of my business. I've done a lot of groundwork and I've failed many times to be able to say I run webinars cold and it converts, you see. So, yes, whilst you don't want people to see you on the webinar and to be totally cold, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that if somebody is watching this and they are at the very early stages of their business, and by early, I'm not even talking about time frame, I'm talking about you haven't even made 6 figures, or even maybe 50, let's go half of that. Like you haven't really made maybe your first 20K, right? Like you haven't nailed, I really think it's important that what people don't take into account is data, right? So if I had a client or if I was speaking to somebody and I said, okay, if you had 100 people come into this webinar, how many would you close? You need to know that data. And if you're not in the place where you can say, this is how many I would close, Pam, I would say, okay, brilliant. Let's not do the webinar thing yet. Let's work on the selling. Let's get your data before you do the webinar, because with a webinar comes a lot of work and possibly ads and possibly lots of moving parts, etc. Get your data right. Know your sales stats. Know that you are the bee's knees. Build your audience. Let people get to know your face, because they're going to come and you want them to buy from you. I have never had, prior to that other situation that I talked about, which was a different business, by the way, not my brand, The Lucrative Lady. It was a completely different brand before I shifted things. Post all of that, I've never had a webinar where I didn't make any sales. But it took a lot of growth, groundwork and failure to figure out. So in essence, that's my long-winded way of saying, give yourself some time.
Great. Where can people connect with you and watch your great free material?
I would love you all to connect with me on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/Pam Obasa, you will find me, or just Google my name, you'll find me, or Google my brand, The Lucrative Lady, as you can see behind you. You will find me there as well. So YouTube is the first place. The second place is just on my website, pamobasa.com. We have a really great newsletter that goes out full of incredible teaching and value. You could actually build a business off of just the newsletter. It is that good. So make sure you check that out.
Great. Well, Pam, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and being on the Webinar Wealth podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. You okay?
I'm okay. I don't know what it is. I don't know why. I get incredibly nervous when I do these things.
No, well, it didn't show. It didn't show, that's for sure.
Oh, God. And then I get the giggles. All good.
Okay. No, it's all good.
Yeah, I'm good.
How's your hubby?
Yeah, all good. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to pause this over here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.